Minister, when did you first become aware that the RCMP was using on-device investigation tools like Pegasus?
Well, first, I want to be clear with the members of the committee that the Pegasus technology is not used by the RCMP. So that's the first thing I would
So clarify. What technology are you using?
Well, secondly, as I said towards the end of my remarks, Mr. Bazan, that some of the investigative techniques are kept confidential to preserve operational integrity, to ensure that we can bring those to justice that are necessary, but always consistent with the Charter and with privacy rights.
Have you issued guidelines that would better provide direction to the RCMP, CSIS, and other federal agencies on how they use ODIT?
Mr. Bazan, that's a good question. There are stringent requirements in the criminal code that require accountability, including what facts the RCMP will be relying on prior to judicial authorization of this sort of technique. There are other safeguards that ensure that only designated agents put those applications to the court. There is the annual report, which we file with Parliament. And of course, I invite any suggestions from this committee during your study.
Does CBSA or CSIS or other federal agencies that fall under your jurisdiction and authority use this technology aside from the RCMP?
Well, again, just to clarify, not Pegasus, but we do use this technique.
Minister, was this on-device investigative tools used while the Emergencies Act was invoked?
It is my knowledge that it was not. And again, for further operational details, I would invite you to ask and put those questions to law enforcement.
We'll raise that later. As you know, National Defense was on training exercises on a King Air aircraft that was circling downtown Ottawa during those protests. Were RCMP or CSIS officers on those planes when they're surveilling those people that were on the ground for these so-called training exercises?
Mr. Bazan, I would invite you to put any operational questions directly to law enforcement.
Have you been briefed on the RCMP's use of the remote activation of microphones and cameras on our mobile devices?
I've had discussions with the RCMP and my officials. I've also had the chance to canvass the annual report, the most recent annual report on the use of electronic surveillance, which most recently was tabled for 2020. There is another report that is forthcoming for 2021. It is one of several mechanisms that we use to be open and transparent with the public about the use of this particular investigative technique.
I'd like to know with specificity what laws and policies are in place to ensure that the tools and new technologies used by the RCMP meet privacy standards under your purview as the minister responsible.
Well, first and foremost, there are the provisions under the criminal code, which again contain great rigor and require great transparency and full, frank, and fair candor to the court. Secondly, there's the Privacy Act. And thirdly,
do you not agree that those agencies also have a duty of candor to the House of Commons in that committee?
Without question.
Okay, I just want to reference with you, now that we have you here before us, that in our previous studies, in fact, we had members of the RCMP refusing to even name what was already publicly available, the person who is responsible for procuring Clearview technology. We have a culture that has been reflected in the courts as a culture of being cavalier, which came through in a judicial decision as commenting on both CSIS and the RCMP. So what are you doing as the minister responsible to ensure that that duty of candor presents us with full, frank, and completely transparent accounting for within this committee and the House of Commons?
In short, holding all branches within my portfolio accountable for those values which you just stated, making sure that the mechanisms are designed and are delivering the transparency that is required to build trust and confidence. And it is an ongoing exercise that constantly requires reflection, especially as we
Let me ask you this last question. We talked about the Privacy Act. We talked about having privacy rights embedded in the preamble. We now have determined that preamble is actually not legally binding. Would you support putting privacy rights within the actual legal framework of the upcoming Privacy Act?
Mr. Green's used all of his time without.
I'll give him time to reflect on that and then reflect back on it in my next round.
Minister, if you can give us a quick yes or no to that, if you'd like like to, I'll let you, but otherwise we're going to go.
You can go.
The short answer, Mr. Chair, is there are charter and privacy protections already built in, but I invite future recommendations as this committee may submit.
Minister, when we talk about procurement and procurement of such technology, and obviously someone makes those decisions, is your office aware of those decisions when they're made?
Well, there are a number of different procurements which are undertaken by independent operational decisions, which, again, for good reason, lie within the purview of the RCMP. You don't want elected officials conducting investigations. That having been said, where there are requests for certain types of technology or additional resources, those are usually appropriated for under budget requests or other requests. And when those are submitted, we obviously evaluate them on the merits.
Thank you. Minister, are you aware of CSIS or a CSE or any other institution using this technology as you've mentioned today?
Well, I can speak certainly for my portfolio. And as I said, the RCMP has said that this is a technique that is used.
Okay. And are you aware of anyone else using this at this point?
Certainly, when techniques like this are used by the government, they are done in a manner that is consistent with the Charter, with privacy laws, and with all of the other mechanisms of transparency that attach to it.
In the testimony of the Privacy Commissioner, when we were talking and referencing the use of Stingray technology, which sets up phantom cell towers to intercept cell phone information, it was noted that there were instances that the use had happened without a warrant. Are you aware of any instances when this might have been used, and I think it was extringent circumstances or something to that effect? Are you aware of any instances where that would have happened?
Yeah, I think the precise test would be whether or not they're exigent or emergency circumstances. But it is my knowledge that these have all been subject to prior judicial authorization. I would invite you to put the question directly to the RCMP as well.
And I'd asked this question, and respectfully, I felt like you kind of danced around it. One of the ways in which I think that this committee would avoid much of the work in which we've already done is if we had a system in place that allowed for privacy impact assessments to happen as a legal requirement through the Privacy Commissioner. I'm going to ask you once again, is that something you would support given the work of this committee and the testimony that you've already given on the importance of privacy as a fundamental right?
Mr. Green, I guess what I'm getting at in my answer is I look forward to receiving that recommendation. I think that's the same answer. I'm going to ask this next question in a direct way. When the privacy impact assessment is provided to the Privacy Commissioner, would you be willing to turn that over to this committee, given the foundation of the duty of candor and the power of this committee to send for documents and evidence? Yeah, I mean, I think I want to be as transparent as I can be about those privacy impacts. I also want to make sure that we're respecting the process that is being undertaken by the Privacy Commissioner in conjunction with the RCMP. So the bottom line for me is I think the more transparent we can be, the better.
Today. You avoided answering the question before, so I'll maybe direct it to you in a little bit of a different way. Are you aware of any other instances of agencies or departments under your purview that have utilized this technology, yes or no?
Again, I would say to you that...
So other than the RCMP, Minister, are you aware of any... I'm not even asking you to identify those departments. Are you aware of any other entities under your purview that have used this technology other than the RCMP?
I was coming to the answer. I was just in the process of saying that these techniques, if and when they are used, are always done in a manner that is consistent with the law and the Charter.
So we'll take that as a yes, although some equivocating on how you came about it. Minister, as has been the case, certainly I've seen a number of times before this committee, that the government's response seems to be, we need to build trust, so just trust us. With, in many cases, including the contradictory testimony that you've given here today with what the Privacy Commissioner spoke about this morning, and seeing how the OPQ signed off on by, I believe, your parliamentary secretary at the time, Ms. Damoff, and the letter that was provided to this committee, there's a difference. There's a discrepancy that exists. So there are provisions within both the criminal code and other legislative frameworks that allow for national security to be used to circumvent Section 6 and the normal judicial processes required for surveillance operations. Minister, yes or no, are you aware of that ever having been used while you've been Minister of Public Safety? Yes or no?
I just want to be very clear that when these techniques are used, they're done in a manner that is compliant with the law. And I've set out on a number of occasions on how.
So, Minister, my question, I think my question was quite direct. There are national security exemptions that can be used to circumvent the typical processes where there's that judicial process that you've expounded on quite fulsomely within Section 6 of the Criminal Code. So there are national security exemptions where these surveillance techniques can be used without fulfilling the full process outlined in Section 6 of the Criminal Code. To your knowledge, are you aware of that ever having taken place while you've been Minister of Public Safety? Yes or no?
I would just, again, point out that when this technique is used, it's done in a manner that is compliant with the law and the Charter. And for any additional details, I would invite you to put those questions directly to the officials who are there to provide those answers.
So with respect, Minister, you are the elected official, cabinet minister, that provides that oversight that Canadians expect. And the fact that there's being less than direct answers, I think, is very, very telling of that culture of secrecy that seems to be involving. Certainly, I hear often from constituents that are frustrated with the actions of this government when it comes to its unwillingness to be forthcoming with what I think are very, very simple questions.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.